sometimes at some points in the movie he also enjoys inflicting.
A little bit.
Yeah, but I definitely thought he was more receiving than anything else.
That's fine. And from that observation, does anybody else have any other observations in terms of other paraphilic disorders this movie may be about when focused through the character of Frank Cotton? I think the first question is, what are the paraphilic disorders? You can't answer that question without giving me the list. So what do you got? Right, so how do you guys learn the planets? Believe it or not, there's a relevance here. The awkward pause is like, where are the wrong planets? How did you learn the planets?
My mother just taught me
Just perfect, right?
Just served us not.
Just sort of nice. You took them in Pluto,
Pluto's very controversial.
It is. The mom got it.
The question remains, what about your very educated father? The guy never gets any kind of highlight here. My very educated father serves porn for thrills. And now you have, I think, a very easy acronym to remember the different paraphilic disorders as per the American Psychiatric Association. So following through with that acronym, can somebody give me the different paraphilic disorders? And briefly pause so that we can then have an opinion as to whether Frank Cotton has it. Masochistic disorder. We got a thumbs up?
Yes.
We have a second? Move on. Very. Good. Frank Cotton has this? Your speculation? The answer is yes. Educated. E.
Exhibitionist.
Good. Exhibitionistic disorder. Yes or no? What do you think about Frank Cotton having this?
Yes.
Yes. Father. F. Good. Good. Barbaristic disorder. Yes or no? Do you think Frank Cotton has this? Good. Yes. Serfs. S. Good. Sadism or sadistic disorder. Sadistic disorder. We already have that established. It's a yes. Porn. P. Pedophilia. Pedophilic disorder. Frank Cotton?
Potentially.
Yeah. 4. F. Fetish. Fetishistic disorder. Yes or no, Frank Cotton? What do you think? Good. Yes. T. Thrills. T. Transvestic fetish. Frank Cotton, yes or no? You guys are awesome. Yes. Right across the board. We'll get to your findings in just a second. Right. Now, there are other paraphilias, and therefore there are other paraphilic disorders. But the DSM will put them to grab that category. Because you can't possibly list a comprehensive, unabridged number of disorders that pertain to the multitude of sexual deviancies that are out there. The size of the DSM will literally reach the ceiling. So, other. And yes, Frank Cotton is in that category as well. Beyond the paraphilias, what are some other observations? Or perhaps related to paraphilic disorders pertaining to Frank Cotton?
I was thinking maybe a substance use kind of picture. Because at the beginning, I think he's tried everything. He's almost like looking for the next fix, getting the box.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So you're now focused, put words in your mouth, the addictive disorders chapter, which itself is divided into 2 parts. What are they? Good. Substance related and non-substance related. Can you give me an example of a non-substance related disorder?
And lastly, like video game.
That's one. Internet gaming disorder, especially in a glossary, it's in the appendix, but I'll count it. One more? Good, yeah. Does Frank Cotton have either of those? That said, is there any evidence of Frank Cotton using a substance in this movie? Any discrete evidence?
You could maybe make the argument, but then again, I would have to kind of like go beyond what the movie showing. Maybe the blood that he is consuming from the corpses could be a leading to a substance use.
Your metaphor?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's all agree that the answer to the question is no, there's no discrete evidence, but I want to go there, right? If there's no discrete evidence that Frank Cotton is using a substance in the film Hellraiser, what about the observation that he's addicted? Because you said that at the beginning of this film, it's fairly well established that he's looking for the next fix. What's going on here? What have you uncovered? This, by the way, is called collective superego. This is an absolute incapacity or an undesire, if that's a word, of not even considering what your id impulse wants you to have complete conscious awareness as a direct effect of a course director's question. What is going on here? What's he addicted to? Huh?
Addicted to being addicted.
Addicted to being addicted? That's a great way of circling the train and getting around the question. Yeah. Yeah, another non-substance related disorder that the American Psychiatric Association has not yet fully embraced. Hence, it's not going to be found in the DSM. But that's what Hellraiser is about. How does one become addicted to sex? And let's keep focused on Friday. Because you mentioned it before. I want you to say it again.
The pain that he's taking?
No. When you were talking about his addiction, you mentioned it. What did the scene entail in the beginning of this movie? Why is he looking for, and why did he discover that box? More specific. Go with that, though. Yes. I want to know more. Pleasure. You said it before. Now that I'm making you say it again. Enter superego. You told me that he's experimented with, or he's did everything he could possibly do. I'm paraphrasing. How did you word it?
So he was looking for more, because he did everything he could to try to experience like pleasure from pain, but he wanted even more.
Say that again. I want to say it louder.
Pleasure from pain.
No, before that. He did everything.
Yeah, he did everything he could to try to experience more.
He did everything he could, which includes my very educated father searched porn for thrills. He's done it all. And not a single one of them brings the amount of pleasure that it once did. Not one of them gives them the same effect. What is that called? Tolerance. Good. Right. And yes, dependence is part of a non-substance related disorder, even if the non-substance related disorder has not yet been identified by the American Psychiatric Association. That's the character we're dealing with here. Matter of fact, he's already drew the conclusion, and this gets into the grab bag category of other, that there's nothing that the material world can hold for him that could possibly have him achieve that level of gratification. So he has to go to another universe to find it. Pretty messed up. And that begins to give you a picture of how depraved and deviant of a character Frank Cotton is. Because stuff that this group refuses to even think of in the context of an academic conversation, he has not only done, but he's done to a point where it no longer gives him any gratification. That's how different Frank is from him. Other observations about the character of Frank Hott in Hellraiser? Since there's a level of discomfort in this room right now, and I love the body posture. I will accept nothing you say from this point on. I'm a psychiatrist. I would never interpret nonverbal communication, of course. Any other observations?
I mean, there's a level of an antisocial personality type thing going on there in terms of his conduct and not respecting people's rights and killing people.
I would suggest for Frank, even if you look past the murder somehow, I would suggest that the vast majority of sexual acts that this person has engaged in did not include consent. Period. And now we can focus not only on Frank, but his relationship with Julia. So, what do you think about this relationship? And you could, again, we don't know much in flashbacks, but that includes his prior relationship, of course, with the character Julia. Comments, thoughts?
From her perspective, it kind of looked like there was codependency on her end. Even when she already had a husband and she was still thinking about him. So there's still that connection there, but it is very dysfunctional in the sense that, to put it lightly, that she goes out and gets victims for him to murder. So.
Let's talk about that. How could we describe this dysfunctional connection? What are some mechanisms that might make this make sense? Have you ever heard of a victim acting like this before? I mean, is everybody here okay with saying that Julia has been victimized? She did not consent to anything that engaged her with Frank.
I'm curious that so admittedly I did not finish this movie because I was too scared. But from what I did see, it did seem like she did enjoy that first scene when he kisses her when he comes for their wedding. So I don't know, I'm kind of curious about that because it seems like she has a sort of interesting mentality where she wants the full-time thing to be something sort of bland and stable that she doesn't really engage with emotionally. But then she wants this excitement of kind of being forced. Even though in her other relationships she is very dominant, but I think she fantasizes about not having that role. But I always thought the first.
Along the lines of what you just mentioned, you are now collectively, any one of us, are a character in this film. And the hint here is that we're going to say that this does not take place in the 80s, but instead takes place in the late 90s. What are some thoughts about what you would like to do to get to really know who Julia is, especially based on Shelby's observation? And the other hint is, have you ever seen the drama House? Okay, so that's a hint. So let's say that this takes place not in the 80s, but in the 90s, and let's say that we are working with Dr. House. What are we going to do? I want to know about Juliet. Of course, I think most of us would say, well, we don't want to talk with her. We would want to know this. But House would stop you and say, because they all are. So what can you do?
You would go to her house.
Go to her house. Exactly right. And then what would we do then?
Observe how she interacts with her husband, with her stepdaughter.
Touch screen, talking screen.
Right up to the
You're all right. It's not but it's not what I'm looking for. We have 10 minutes, guys. What do we want to do? On how to get stuff. What do we need to do to make sure that we come out of that house safely with the knowledge that we need? What makes this character tick?
go through all like her possessions.
What possession are you looking for?
Diary.
Well, she has one. What's even better than a diary? Huh?
Home movies.
Sorry, louder.
Cell phone,
Cell phone? What are you looking for in cell phone?
like personal communication
Okay, even better than that.
on a phone. Or
Well, possibly phone, but even better than that. Okay, he doesn't have a house, vanilla.
Internet history.
I love it. Now, you see how that?
Internet history.
Right? Couple of minutes with our internet history, we will leave the house with everything we need to know. At Shelby's point, we'll get a real clear picture of what this particular character thinks about when she's alone, or she thinks she's alone. Okay? Now, at some point, individuals will graduate, and this comes from forensic psychiatry, looking at psychopaths and psychopathic serial killers. They will actually evolve from fantasy to begin to actually role play. Maybe first with animals, but then even humans. Okay? And sometimes it'll be role play, but then sometimes it'll be actual behaviors that break the law. Hence why antisocial personality would be one of the first considerations in a clinical setting. And certainly Julie, I think, is doing this. Her search history is going to surely show us something that, quote unquote, we didn't expect, but now you do. And she may have actually began to role play this. Is there any further ideology or mechanism that would lend more explanation to what Julie is doing in this movie? And that includes the flashbacks to what she was doing before the movie, the sequel. Oh, sorry, the prequel. Again, the idea of the victim taking an active part in their own victimization, including, yeah, that's exactly right, mechanisms pertaining to the Stockholm Syndrome. She's an active aggressor in this movie, and it may be a product of the mechanisms that explain the Stockholm Syndrome. Right? There is a chance, may not be a very big one, but if there is a chance that if Julie is apprehended, if she didn't meet her demise in Hellraiser 1, if she is apprehended in the sequel, that her defense would be the Stockholm Syndrome. And that she felt emotionally violated, compelled to connect with her aggressor so as to explain her aggressive behavior. So that's a consideration here too. What if, on your shelf exam, Frank Cotton became overly focused? What I mean is that his evolution is that he was in total control of this character, and that because he loses that aspect and begins to also become enmeshed, she is able to take advantage of that and escape. From Frank's perspective, what might that be called? It's the opposite of the Stockholm Syndrome, where the aggressor becomes connected emotionally with their captives. This is potentially V for Vendetta. Raiders to the movie. One of the top 5 revenge books ever made. Not quite as good as Kill Bill, but very good. It's called the Lima Syndrome, L-I-M-A, Lima Syndrome. So it comes up in exams. All right. More about Julia.
I mean, I was thinking that there could be, I don't think this is what it's actually called anymore, but the shared psychotic disorder. I don't know if that's still,
Yeah. The DSM-5 removed it.
okay, got it.
Yeah. And as we discussed previously, because many of the films we choose to discuss in this context, in this curriculum, are the very classic slasher films, the protagonist often tries to tell people what's going on. They don't believe her, in the beginning of the film, but surely end up believing her at the end of the film. So almost every slasher film is a case study of what was formerly known as folie à deux or shared psychotic disorder. And so, yeah, I agree. Any other characters you want to discuss? Kirsty? I mean, she would be the one that I would be most concerned of with regard to the idea of shared psychosis. And the mechanisms of shared psychosis absolutely exist. The American Psychiatric Association just has to figure out exactly how they want to kind of approach this. So they removed it from the DSM. I suspect it'll be back into DSM, perhaps 6, in some form. Right now, it's under psychotic disorder that is not otherwise specified. And there's 2 variants of that, but that would be the current designation of what was formerly known as shared psychotic disorder. Does Kirsty remind you of any other character you discussed in this courtship? What other characters did you discuss in this courtship?
We talked about Roman last week.
Coraline? Is that the only one we discussed? I forgot. I actually forget.
Oh, yeah.
Cat times, yeah.
That's not good. Okay, so the 12 Monkeys was the week prior? Okay, so we missed 12, there's a character in 12 Monkeys that is afflicted with the same experience, same signs and symptoms as Kirsty here. And that's the idea that Kirsty knows what's going on, I guess the final world motif in slashers and horror movies, but nobody believes her. And that's to the extent that some of that includes being able to anticipate the future. It's referred to as the Cassandra syndrome, which is what 12 Monkeys is about. How does that condition take its name? Or at least the fictional description of it take its name? Who is Cassandra in Greek mythology? Cassandra is a character that's part of the Oresteia, which is the sequel to the Iliad. So after the fall of Troy, after the sack of Troy, Agamemnon returns home to his kingdom. And he brings with him a concubine, Cassandra. Cassandra refused the sexual advances of the god Apollo, which in Greek mythology is not a good thing to do. So Apollo curses her. He gives her the gift of foretelling and seeing the future, but also the curse that she can do nothing about it. So anything she says to anyone is rejected, even though she understands what's going to happen. And to the extent that our character Kirsty knows what's going to happen pertaining to the Cenobites, and is that final world motif that we see again and again in the horror genre, nobody believing her, is a nice parallel with this character in Hellraiser and the Cassandra character in Greek mythology, specifically the Oresteia. Cassandra knows that when she enters the palace with Agamemnon, they will both be assassinated by Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, and her lover. And she tells everyone, she tells Agamemnon the king. But as per the Apollo curse, nobody's going to believe her. So they walk in together and they die together. Clytemnestra, the name is translated into classic putter, has her own problems, and they're certainly the topic of discussion in the second and third parts of the trilogy, the Oresteia. The libation bearers and the Eumenides. Final 2 books, or the final 2 parts of the Oresteia. and that is Julie. And even though she uses a hammer in the movie, in the book from which the Julie is adopted or adapted, Coach uses a knife. So it's a very, very close contact with these two characters. All of this to make a major point, focusing on our last character or set of characters, the Cenobites. Pinhead. What do you think about it? Anything we could do here with regard to contextualizing within psychiatry?
He seems to be the leader of all of them, and he has some quite impactful phrases throughout the movie, such as, I think I remember him saying, "We will destroy your soul," or something like that. So definitely personality disorder.
That's fair.
Sure.
Yeah, definitely a total disregard for
Yeah.
others' personal safety, no doubt. We also know that with regard to who these beings are, there is no distinction between pleasure and pain, which not only gets to the paraphilias and the paraphilic disorders, but also gets to some basic neurophysiology and where the pain center is and where the pleasure center is. And what if they were the same center? What would that mean for us? And the idea here is that what the Cenobites offer is opening up these brain regions that, as far as where we are in evolution, have not yet been opened up. Is there a parallel in psychiatry? Is there something that we do that opens up brain areas, deeper recesses, our head, that normally are not open?
I said CBT.
Okay, Myra.
CBT.
So you mean psychotherapy?
Like, yeah.
So that's definitely an option. So let's keep it psychotherapy.
I was gonna say like drugs, like psychotropic.
But let's put this together. I think you both are right, and I want to now merge these ideas. Psychotherapy and drugs. Is there a drug that people can take or maybe even have taken that within the context of psychotherapy has actually reached this goal of going places to another realm that is an altered state?
MDMA or
Yeah, MDMA, and that's currently undergoing trials.
PTSD?
LSD, which was therapeutically used within psychotherapy back in the 1960s. Ayahuasca,
DMT.
DMT, psilocybin, all the above, right? And whether or not you want to take Hellraiser as just an awesome classic 80s slasher movie, please do. And look at the Mark Hansen configuration as that puzzle key that opens up another realm, or take it as a metaphor for hallucinogens and similar acting substances, DMT, LSD. Again, will be up to us. Exactly what's going on here. If you've watched Hellraiser, what I would strongly suggest is you watch the HBO documentary on Cary Grant, because he attests that LSD, due to this very mechanism, saved his life. Under the guidance of a psychiatrist, it alleviated severe and treatment refractory depression. And it was because of the altered state that he was able to enter into, that he was able to work through things that he couldn't while being awake, alert, and alert. So is Frank Cotton a medium, or is he a shaman?
Sorry to interrupt.
All right. So again, I'll actually leave that hanging out there rhetorically. Nobody could answer. I know we have to cut this short. So we'll end it there. You guys can get to your mandatory session, and we'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you.